Good morning, everybody. Well, welcome to the Coffee with Lisa show. I'm your host, Lisa Patrick, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Fannin. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Jeffrey. So he holds a Ph.D. in psychology, an MBA and Bachelor of Science degree in mass communications. He's the founder and the executive director for the Center for Cognitive Enhancement and Thought Genius. He's worked in the neuroscience field mapping and analyzing the brain for over 17 years. And Dr. Fannin has extensive experience training the brain for optimal brain performance, working with attention deficit disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, and trauma recovery. Over the years, he's been involved in the cutting-edge research using the EEG technology to accurately measure balanced brainwave energy as the whole brain state. Engaging this process forms symmetrical brainwave pattern in both hemispheres of the brain and creates harmony for the front and the back of the brain. So I want to thank you, Dr. Fannin, for joining us today. I understand that you've got some leading work with the United States military at West Point, and you've served on the faculty at the Walden University teaching cognitive neuroscience at the doctoral level. Welcome to the show.
Lisa, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. I'm very excited to learn about what is brain mapping and some of the exciting things that I know because I'm good friends with Sherry Gideons, and Sherry introduced us. Some of the things that you've got going on, you've got some pretty dynamic and interesting things. But first and foremost, let's get to know you a little better. Where are you from, Dr. Jeffrey? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Utah. And, then we moved away from the Salt Lake City area and moved down here to the Phoenix area. We actually lived in Scottsdale when I was in high school. And, once I got out of high school, then I started to roam the world. So, I was gone a lot. I worked in Chicago for a while at WGN Television as a technical director. So that helped me, in my later years. And then the military came along, and I thought I was going to get out of that, but I ended up getting drafted. They had the draft going on, and they went to 195 that year in the draft, and my number was 192.
Oh my!
Yeah, so I went, and I was able to. They said we're going to pick for you, or you go ahead and pick. And so I took a bunch of tests. And they wanted to put me in the Army, and I said I don't think so. And so they took a bunch of us in a room after they gave us all these tests. And they said, "You scored so high, we're going to make you a helicopter pilot." Well, the Vietnam War was hot and heavy back then. This was in the early 70s, and so I didn't want anything to do with being a helicopter pilot because their life expectancy was like 30 minutes. So. I thought there might be something better, so I went to the Air Force, and I said they knew they had me over a barrel because they gave me 48 hours to either pick where I was going or they would select for me.
Yeah.
And so I took all these tests, and because of my background in television, and I had an undergraduate degree in mass communications, I thought that's what I wanted to do. So when I went to basic training, they basically said, "Look, we can't guarantee that, but we can bring you in a general field. And when you get to basic training, just tell them you want a bypass specialist test." Well, I got down there to basic training and, hook, line, and sinker. So I basically said, I want to take a bypass specialist test. And they said, no way, there's a war on, because the Vietnam War was hot and heavy. Yeah. And so they said, we'll give you some tests here and we'll see what you're made for. So they gave me a bunch of tests, and at the end of basic training, they were passing out the jobs and stuff. And so I get this one that says, you'll be an AC&W operator. I said, what is that? I'm going to run a root beer stand. What is an AC&W operator? But it was aircraft control and warning. So I learned to control airplanes, and that's what I would do. And so as Vietnam was getting towards the end, and I finished my tour in Cold Bay, Alaska, of all places, where the peninsula comes out, and the Aleutian Islands. The very last place before the Aleutian Islands is Cold Bay. Well, it's named Cold Bay for a very good reason. I think the coldest it ever got was a minus 73 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, they wouldn't let us go outside. But anyway, I was supposed to go from there to Vietnam, you know, because of my background, and I was going to be a forward air controller. Now, a forward air controller is a guy that sits in the jungle talking to the airplane and telling him when to drop his napalm. You know, so I'm thinking, who have I pissed off now, you know, to get this wonderful assignment? So fortunately, the Vietnam War ended 2 weeks before I was scheduled to go to Vietnam. And so because I was at a remote site, I got my duty station of choice. So I said, I'm going to Europe. So I went to Germany and was involved with the, you know, radar group and stuff like that, and doing weapons control intercept. And for a while, and because of my background in television, then they put me, allowed me to go in as a television producer, you know, for the Armed Forces Network. So I spent 3.5 years traveling around Europe, making movies and things like that, and doing Air Force Now films and stuff like that. So I got some stuff there. And I also learned to fly while I was in Germany. So I joined an aero club and would fly people up and down the Rhine River looking at castles.
So was it helicopters you ended up flying?
Yeah, fixed wing, you know.
It was.
And so, yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
But, yeah, people would come and visit me, and I'd say, well, you want to go to France for lunch? France was like 20 minutes away. You know, I was at Ramstein Air Base. And so I did a lot of that. And then when I came home, you know, got my commercial instrument rating. Then I worked my way up flying tours for Lake Powell and Air Service, and then being able to move into getting enough hours to fly for the airline. So then I got hired by US Air. So I was an airline pilot for US Air based at LAX, you know, living in Phoenix, in Los Angeles there. So did that for a while, and then decided I was going to do something different. And, you know, that's when they started to have a reduction in force. And so I had like 6,000 hours of my logbook, but I couldn't even get an interview because of all of the airline pilots and things because of the reduction in force. Yeah. So that sent me off, and I decided to go back to school, get my degree in psychology, and learned about brain mapping and that sort of thing. And that really interested me. And so I knew it'd be 3 years before my number came up, my seniority number, to get back in the airlines. But by that time, I really didn't want to get back because my seniority number, I would always be in the middle of, you know, the bubble there, so to speak. Yeah. So I went off and started doing brain mapping and, you know, then training the brain. And so I've been doing that for the last 20 years.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's quite the story, because you go from, number one, saying you don't want to fly helicopters to learning how to fly helicopters, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, Dr. Fannin.
Well, I wasn't flying helicopters. I'm flying fixed wing, just, you know, so
airplane. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love to fly, you know, and so I just wasn't sure I wanted to be a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. You know,
no,
so,
I don't blame you. But so, I mean, being the guy on the ground telling people where to drop the bombs isn't fun either.
No. So everything worked out. The universe was looking out for me, and decided that I should take this path and work with people now the way that I do. Because I was always trying to find a better way to work with people. And so that's what I do now. I have programs where I can work with anybody anywhere in the world and talk about, you know, what's going on in their brain and how to get rid of subconscious belief patterns and all the things that I write about in my books. You know, I started writing those in about, I think about 2008 or 2007, somewhere in there. Yeah. And so it took me a long time because I was traveling around the world and, you know, working with people and, you know, so.
You're really getting your stories for, you know, commanding the power of thought, really.
Right. Yeah. And being able to work with people and understand what they do and how they do it. And so my degree in psychology has helped me a lot with understanding, you know, human behavior. And, you know, because I think a lot of people nowadays are really kind of stuck. You know, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I get there? I just finished doing a video that I'm going to be putting up here. I'm actually converged or changed my office here at home. So I'm actually sitting in my little YouTube studio. And so I got green screens and all kinds of things and lights around here. But I just did a video on subconscious beliefs and how, you know, we can deal with that. And there are basically 7 lies, 7 myths that we all subscribe to, you know, and so that became very important, you know, in helping people understand. And then how do you actually change that? So there is a part of my training is in dealing with subconscious beliefs. And because they are subconscious, we really aren't aware that that's what's happening because they're in that subconscious part of our brain.
Yeah.
So I talk about those things in the book and how to get rid of subconscious beliefs. And I will work with people over the internet, like on a Zoom meeting or something kind of like what we're doing here, and help them, you know, find out what their belief needs to be, what the old belief is. Because what happens with a subconscious belief is essentially that we have a thought over and over and over again, and that gets it gets recorded in our subconscious, and our behaviors come out in our subconscious beliefs. So if you want to know what's on your subconscious belief window, just look at your behavior. Well, I'm doing this and I don't want to, and so you can change that. And so I work with people all over the world and helping them change something that they're doing they don't want to do. So it's firing the new one rather than the old one.
Yeah.
Because the way that comes together scientifically is we have an event, and then we're going to put some meaning to that event, and then we add some emotion, and we call that a cognition. Those get bound together with what we call acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter. And so it's like when you have a memory about a song and it takes you way back when. Well, when that gets fired, it goes in your subconscious memory and grabs a hold of that cognition, and that's why you have that memory. So when we are doing things and we don't want to be doing them, and I used to talk about this a lot, you know, going back in my history, and I would do things after I got out on my own, and I'd say, where did that come from? Why do I do that sort of thing? And then I would go home to visit my parents, and I would see it, and it's like, yeah, there it is. So as we're growing up from the 3rd trimester of our inception all the way up to age 7 or 8, we have no filters. So our brain is basically in theta.
Well, I would say some people nowadays, even as adults, lack the ability to filter.
That's funny, Lisa, because I have a saying around here: you're only young once, but you can be immature forever.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's so true.
Yeah, well, it is, because that's what drives our behavior. And so if we want to grow and develop, and sometimes we can't get out of that young development where we have no filters and our brain is basically in delta and theta. So everything that we're learning how the world works and what our perception is. And so that's what guides our perception of the world and what we think and how the world works. And we don't realize until we get later on in our years, even in our adult years, that there's a 5-year-old driving the train here, you know. And so we have to do something to get rid of that. But there is a process that can be done, and it's a physiological process. So I talked about the acetylcholine, and basically what happens when we have we want to get rid of the old belief, and we cause that cognition, we disengage the emotion from that. So you may not get rid of the memory, but the emotion gets disengaged, so you have no emotion, so it doesn't trigger that behavior. And then you can install causing a second burst of acetylcholine to happen. And I know a lot about this because that's what I wrote my doctoral dissertation on EMDR, on anxiety, stress, and depression in the workplace. So,
and so it's really eliminating the emotion attached to the memory in order to stop the behavior from occurring in the future, right?
Well, exactly, because when we look at the relationship, there are 3 electromagnetic centers that we deal with that are very important. One is the electromagnetic centers around our chakras.
Yeah.
The second one is the electromagnetic center around our heart. And the third one is the electromagnetic center around the brain. So there are signals that are going from the heart to the brain to start those electrochemical situations. So we have those emotions and those feelings.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the electromagnetic center around the heart is 60 times greater than the electromagnetic center around the brain. So what that really means is there are over 4,000 neurites around the heart. Now, a neurite is like a neuron in the brain. It can think, it can remember, it can learn. And so these neurites, and that's why we look at the heart chakra, for example, when we're trying to develop coherence within our cells. If you look at my friend Bruce Lipton's work in biology of belief and those kinds of things, the cells have to be dynamic. And what that means is your cells have to be able to communicate one with another. And so that's part of this coherence issue. So when we have the signals going from the heart to the brain, and there are two parts of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is sending up the trigemic nerve, the vagus nerve from the heart to the brain, and it's activating those chemicals so we have those feelings. And so when we get anxious or overwhelmed or angry or whatever, it's causing those neuropeptides to occur, and we have those chemicals, which then triggers some of our memories and feelings and from our subconscious. And so that's the mechanism that gets in there. So this is about developing coherence or adding the second part of the autonomic nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, where it calms down that overwhelm, the anxious, the fear, and balances that out. And that's what we call coherence. And so when we have a coherent system running through the heart, that we are creating this calm, energetic system that is transmitting the energy and information from cell to cell to cell. And when that's balanced, then we have coherence. And so I did a lot of research on working with people and looking at what creates the coherence and how do you do that with people anywhere in the world.
And so how does brain mapping, so let's talk a little bit more about like what is exactly brain mapping for those of us, including myself. I mean, I have a high level understanding, but not a real in-depth understanding. What is brain mapping and how does that contribute to what we're talking about?
Well, brain mapping is really an EEG, an electroencephalogram. So we'll put a cap on the head and then we'll inject gel down into like 20 different locations. And we are looking at the EEG. Once we get the EEG, and so I will take like a baseline, eyes open, eyes closed, so with your brain on task, things like that. So we can see how it functions in different realms. One of them I might do meditation to see how their brain functions in meditation. So doing over 4,000 brain maps around the world with meditators. And what I found is most people have no idea how to meditate and their brains are far too busy, so we have to teach them how to calm their brain down.
That would be me. I have no, I'd be scared to see what my EEG would say when I was trying to meditate.
Well, when they open up the borders, come on down and brain map.
I'm coming for sure. Absolutely.
So you can talk to Sherry. We did hers. We've done, Shannon's, a bunch of other people, to kind of see what goes on with it. Then I also have some equipment that you put your fingers down on the camera lens and it will shoot a 10 millivolt charge. It's so small you can't even feel it. So we can measure your energy field. We can measure your chakras. We can see when they're misaligned, that sort of thing. And, then we can do whatever we need to do in order to bring those back into alignment to increase your coherence. And I have an 8-week program that I work with people. They can see that on my website if they want.
And so once you've done the procedure of the brain mapping and you've used the gel and you've done this test. There
are patterns there. So we will take the EEG and convert it into what we call a QEEG, which is a quantitative EEG. So I get a bunch of little heads in every frequency. 1 hertz, 2 hertz, 3 hertz, all the way up to 30 hertz. And then we can start to see patterns. So when I see too much alpha in the front of the brain, then I know people are going to have problems with focus and concentration issues, or too much beta in the back of the brain. This is where we're going to see things like anxiety and stuff like that, the busyness in the brain and that sort of thing. And so we can tell how many standard deviations is there, and that tells me, okay, here's what we have to do to retrain the brain. So we all have this thing called neuroplasticity. In other words, training the brain. So if the amplitude of the energy is too much energy in the front of the brain and you're losing focus and concentration, we bring that down. Same thing with the back of the brain. You got anxiety, we're going to bring that down and cause the brain to function in a normal range and add the coherence. So now you can do what it is you want. If you're trying to deal with, let me give you an example of, many people have heard of the law of attraction, so I speak to this a lot. And so there are some physics that are involved with that. When we have a thought and it is vibrating at a particular, now whether it's a wanted thought or an unwanted thought, it doesn't really matter. And so it's vibrating at a particular rate. If we hold that thought for 16, 17 seconds, then other energy that is vibrating like it will be attracted to it. Now, if we have the wanted thoughts, as these two come together, they are increasing the energy or the amplitude of that energy that is there. And after 68 seconds, we understand through physics that it's not just affecting the energy or that is out there, it's affecting particle matter. So now we are attracting that which we want. But the problem is, we as human beings, we have a wanted thought, then an unwanted thought, a wanted thought. So we're constantly putting resistance into the field based on, our paradigm, our subconscious belief patterns, all of these kinds of things that are happening. And people don't understand, okay, well, how do I get rid of those beliefs that aren't working for me? Well, we go through that process and get rid of them. And how do I instill the ones that I do want? Those are the ones that I want to fire off. So there's a way of instilling new ones and creating new patterns, new habits, of being able to teach the relationship between the heart and the brain so that you have this coherent function. So the cells are talking to each other, from cell to cell.
Yeah, in a pattern that makes sense, right? Clearly.
Right, yeah, one that's working for you. You actually have control over all of that. It's
so
just
I can't imagine.
I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, I can't imagine, like, when I think about veterans, for instance,
right,
or children who have gone through trauma, the amplitude of opportunity to help them through brain mapping must be extraordinary. You must do a lot of work.
When I very first got into this field, I worked with a lot of children who had been abused or neglected. And so they had this PTSD-like trauma. And so I've worked also with a lot of military veterans and done some studies with things like that. And how do you get rid of that? How do you change that? Because it's very nice to measure this. And there's one thing that is very important, and that is the relationship between the cells in our bodies. So that's why we do, I'll send out a kit to people if they can't come to me. And there's 2 steps to this kit. One, they poke their finger and get a couple of drops of blood. We send it into the lab. Then the second part is where they do an online cognitive test. It takes about 15 minutes. So if I can't get the brain map that I normally do.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Jeffrey, this is the brain span that you're talking about, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. I'm going to play a video for everybody about brain span that really talks specifically to what Dr. Fannin is talking about, and then we're going to explore this a little bit more. Stand by.
Optimizing the health of the brain is the future of healthcare. Brain health is the gateway to produce optimal health for the entire body. The ability to measure, track, and improve brain function and key blood biomarkers has profound implications for your overall health. BrainSpan is revolutionizing preventive brain health by providing a complete blood profile that reflects both cellular health and systemic inflammation and connects these metrics to brain function. The neural health assessment is simple yet thorough. It is generated from 2 brief steps activated from a small kit. 1. A patient-performed finger stick, providing a few droplets of blood on a card. And 2. A brief web-based cognitive function assessment on a touchscreen device. Within 2 to 3 days of processing, an electronic report is available that elegantly illustrates the status and relationships between nutrition, inflammation, and brain function. Specific information on the omega-3 index and the omega-6-omega-3 ratio, among other indices, help you avoid being in the dark when it comes to quality and quantity of specific dietary nutrients. The results of the cognitive function assessment are described to include the areas of attention, processing speed, and memory, linking them back to the nutritional metrics and specific lifestyle recommendations, making them more meaningful and motivating. A wellness summary is also provided so you can easily understand what your results really mean for you today and for your future if you don't take steps to improve it.
Hit that.
We're back.
Really interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I started traveling around the world and doing stuff with people, I wanted to find a way in order to help people no matter where they are in the world. And so I was speaking at a conference in San Francisco that Bruce Lipton had set me up with this deal to speak there. About 1,000 people at this conference. And they had displays and things set up. And so that's where I met the owners of BrainSpan. And come to find out that they're doing a lot of the same kind of research and things that I was doing. So I got involved with them, and I've been doing this for many years now. And, you know, with hundreds and hundreds of people where they take this test, because I was looking for that relationship between the brain and the body, or basically the cells, and what's going on in the brain. And this gives me that measurement. So when I'm working with somebody, we will do this test at the beginning of the 8 weeks, and then we will do it again at the end of the 8 weeks. And in between, we work on how to change things so we can look at their report and see what's affecting the cells, what's affecting their brain. And, you know, we can look at their memory, their processing speed, you know, their cognitive functions, all of those things. So if they can't get to me to do a brain map at QEEG, then we can do it this way, you know, and then talk about what their needs are, and then go about, you know, bringing them in line. We can actually see the trajectory of whether you're aging too slowly or too quickly, you know, and where you fall in that trajectory. And we know what it is that we have to do. Taking supplements, actually, they are NRF1, NRF2 activators that activate these pathways that deal with our aging, with our cellular health, that sort of thing.
Right, right. And so can you tell us a story about, because you must have some clients that have seen dramatic changes in their lives. So can you think of somebody that, off the top of your head, that was one of the most dramatic stories that happened for you as a result of your work?
Dramatic stories, but let me tell you how this all kind of got started here.
Yeah,
it happened kind of by accident. So
as all the greatest things do.
Yeah, exactly. So I was working with a young man who had problems with focus and concentration. So we did the brain map with him, and I was doing the traditional way of helping change the process in the brain and that sort of thing. So as I learned more about these activators, NRF1, NRF2, I put him on this regimen after we had done a brain map, and then 12 days later, I did another brain map. And I saw something that I have never seen in the 25 years that I've been doing this. And that is that everything was in the normal range. And it's like, how is that possible? You know, and so I'm comparing them side by side. So I have some videos and talk about these kinds of things. I've done a lot of interviews, but basically it was showing that in the normal range. So at first I thought there was something wrong with the brain, with the cap, you know, with the data, but it all checked out. And so I began to look at this more from a quantum physics point of view. I'd say, how is this physically possible? So as I looked at that, and I was talking earlier about having the right environment for your cells so that they can function normally. And so I began to, as I was breaking down different parts of the brain map and looking at coherence, it went from a very messy coherence to normal. And now that didn't cure his ADD because there were too many gaps in his learning, but it did open up his cellular pathways to allow this connection, this communication between cell to cell to open up and be coherent. And so as we worked with him, before we started doing this, the parents were getting 2 and 3 calls a day from the school. You know, he's acting out, he doesn't bring his homework, he's being belligerent, typical things that we would see with kids who lose focus and concentration. Then 12 days later, mom brings in a note saying, from the school saying, wow, what a turnaround. He's bringing in his homework, he's doing what he needs to do, he's not being belligerent, he's not acting out. So by the end of the school year, instead of getting D's and F's on his report card, he was getting A's and B's. Now, I have another young man that I just finished working with here, maybe a month or so ago, and he wanted to get into college. He finished high school, but his SAT scores were so low that he wouldn't be able to get into. So we put him on this routine of retraining his brain and so forth. And so then he's retook his SAT test, had a tutor and whatnot that helped him, and he got such a high enough score. He wanted to go to UNLV, but he couldn't qualify to get in there. And right now, he is at UNLV. He got his admission to UNLV, and he's now taking courses at UNLV.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So clearly,
all of us, no matter what you're in, you know, what you want to be limitless and be more powerful and have, you know, subconscious belief patterns that propel you forward. So you're not dealing with anxiety and depression or, you know, not being able to work well.
So you talk, like, while I was doing some research on you for the show, you talk about commanding the power of thought. What does that mean to you?
That means a lot of things. You know, as we have a thought, you know, over and over, I'll go back to what I was talking about earlier, that we have wanted thoughts and we have unwanted thoughts. Now, here's the science of some of this. When we look at, and this is, I kind of explain this a lot in the book, that 95% of our thoughts come from our subconscious mind. So in how that process works, in the conscious part of our brain, only 5% of what we say, think, and do will happen. 95% of it comes from our subconscious belief. Now, when we look at the brain as a whole, you know, how is it actually processing? That the thinking part of our brain, the conscious part, that it processes at 40 bits per second. Now, when we go to the subconscious part, it processes at 40 million bits per second. Wow. You know, and so there's so much going on down there, and because we're not aware of it, it comes out in our behavior. And so commanding the power of thought really is about, okay, what do I do? How, you know, what are the things that get in my way? You know, and so we look at that 95% of our thoughts, and this one bothered me for years and kind of set me off on this path. It's like, you know, why would God create 95% of our thoughts to be negative thoughts? You know, and so I thought about that, and I thought about it, and then finally in one of my meditations, it came to me that the reason that 95%, we have to know what we don't want in order to pick what we do want. It's a matter of free will. You know, we can't have free will or free choice unless, you know, we have to know what we don't want in order to choose what we do want. Right. And so that's what that's all about. And so why we that is the default mechanism. So this is more about deciding what you want, how you want to live your life, what you want to have happen. But most people live life by default. You know, they don't design what it is that they want and how they go about living their life. They just do whatever comes naturally.
Good. Well, Jen is watching with me today, and Jen, her and I were doing a program called 75 Hard, which is really a way of retraining our body and our mind over 75 days. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 75-day hard challenge or not, but it is, patterns of behavior over time, right? So commanding the power of thought to actually change our behavior. You're talking about how you're looking at mind mapping and the unconscious at 95% of the time in the unconscious. And so how does things like gratitude play a role in that? And some of those soft skills of life skills.
Yeah, let me kind of explain that. When we look at gratitude and appreciation, and many people use those synonymously, but here's the science of that. When we are grateful for something, what it usually means is we are grateful that we are not here and we're over here, And so there is a lower vibration, a lower frequency in gratitude, whereas appreciation, the frequency or vibration is higher. It's closer to unconditional love in those things. And so when people say that, well, I'm grateful for this, if they would just change that to, I appreciate this. So, for example, I'm sitting here in Arizona, and it's a very nice day. It's like 85 degrees here. This is why we live in Arizona. But when it was hot during the summer, I could be sitting here in my office working and have appreciation that I'm not out there in 116 degree heat. Or I can have appreciation that it's a sunny day, or I can have appreciation that it's raining. Or when I go to bed, I can have appreciation for my nice soft pillow, my nice warm blanket. Where there's difference in gratitude as opposed to appreciation. So if I want to attract more things that I'm appreciative for, and we look at this thing called the receptive zone. So we go into this wanted, unwanted kind of thing. And so I have to open up to being in the receptive zone. And so to be in the receptive zone, I'm going to start having that feeling, that emotion of appreciation, sending that vibration out there that I am appreciative, and then I can begin to attract what it is that I want. But I kind of have to open up that doorway of appreciation to be in the receptive zone. Otherwise, if I'm putting resistance into the field with unwanted thoughts or unwanted feelings, I'm just pushing away the very thing I'm trying to create. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I talk lots about how to make yourself an eligible receiver in life, right? And that's essentially what you're talking about. How do you make yourself an eligible receiver? Well, Dr. Fannin, I want to thank you very much. We're getting close to closing our show here. We're already at almost 45 minutes. But I always ask, and I always find this really interesting. So one, I've learned a lot more about brain mapping and the value behind the science. Which is really important because I think sometimes we don't appreciate that enough, first and foremost. But one of the things that, we are really in challenging times right now. And so how do we, or what is your number one suggestion moving forward? Because clearly I haven't had my brain mapped, and I'm not there for the brain span. So what's your one piece of advice that you'd give people right now today that they could apply in their lives moving forward to have a better life?
Lisa, that's a wonderful question. And I started thinking about stuff like that because I was getting a lot of interviews and things because of the books. And so I created, you can get a free gift. I have a free gift for your audience here. If they go to my website, they can download, the 5 keys to commanding the power of thought, which kind of addresses some of these things that people can do. And a large part of it is just don't allow yourself. It's kind of like training a dog, sit, stay, sit, stay, and training our brain to do what it is that we want. It takes a little bit of time to develop new neural pathways so that the good ones, pay attention to what you're feeding your brain. A lot of people get online and watch all kinds of things, what is your morning routine deal with? And so what are you thinking? When I have a negative thought, and this doesn't preclude anybody from having negative thoughts, but when you have one, what is it you actually do? And you can stop yourself and say, no, I don't do that anymore. I'm going to go into that receptive zone. I'm going to think about something that I can appreciate, and it's being present in the moment. You know, so you're present in the moment, be aware of what you're thinking about, and then find something in the moment that you can appreciate when you're finding that you're not appreciating the things that that's not coming naturally.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so very much today. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to come down to Arizona and get a brain span.
Yeah, whenever you're ready, you know.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you very much. Take care and talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Lisa.